Finally, Tony Storm hits the exposed turnbuckle after nailing Baker off the apron. And Jamie Hayter wins 1, 2, 3, and they loved it. And right then, Tony Khan had to be sitting at the fucking gorilla position, looking at the monitor, going, my God, how much did I just spend for Saraya? And this girl was already on the roster.
Yeah, and she's organically, like you said, grown into something of a phenomenon, and they would be really dumb if they didn't capitalize on this. I mean, the obvious thing to do is break her away from Britt and have her become kind of the baby face of the situation. People want to cheer for her. I would say, and I think I told you this before we started, but I would call this the best match on the card. Yeah. And that's not a knock on, I thought with MJF and Moxley, obviously that's the main event, and the story being told there I thought was compelling. But for the match itself, bell to bell, for me, this was the best match on the card. And
you're right. The thing is, the best match on the card can not necessarily always be the main event or blah, 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 but can be viewed as the match that showed both people to their best exposure and got the point that was supposed to be gotten across. That's the best match.
It can be. I remember years ago when I did an interview with Vince for the magazine, for WWF magazine. And he was very much against the idea that you just mentioned. He was not, I don't know if you ever got this impression from him, but he specifically brought up with WrestleMania 3, I guess this had been sticking in his craw for about 25 years, but he hated the fact that everybody talks about Steamboat and Savage being the best match on the show, because he said to me that because of the story, strictly based on who drew the money and what was the biggest story, that Hogan and Andre has got to be the best match on the show, because that and in his view, I guess he thought anytime you have an undercard match that steals the show, that's something that shouldn't be happening, which I guess, I don't know. That was his view. But
see, now Vince, I think, is a little bit far on the other side of this thing.
Yeah.
Because everybody knew going in that Hogan and Andre was going to be just fugly, just fucking ugly as far as a wrestling match, but that was what sold the tickets and drew the money and the two iconic personalities. But underneath, you want to give them good matches because the rest of the show, the people have been thrilled, they're excited, they come, and then they see the big main event that they paid to see, and everybody was happy when Hogan hit the leg drop. But if every match on the card had been worse in the ring than Hogan and Andre, and they weren't matches with those iconic personalities, and they weren't matches that people actually paid to see and drew the money, and they were also worse than Hogan and God, then that would have been an abysmal show.
He seemed to hate the idea of judging matches, like the whole star ratings and all that. Like he even mentioned it specifically. He hated the idea of divorcing a match from the storyline and the angle. Like, to him, it was all about the storyline and the angle, and that's what made the match special. And he just hated the idea of judging a match like you would a performance, at least for the fans to do that. It's one thing that he just didn't like that idea at all.
But again, that's what some people do, but that's not what I do, because if the match is, you've got to have great matches on your show. They don't all have to be great, because some of them, like Hogan and Andre, couldn't possibly be great, but they'll also sell tickets. But if you have all crummy matches with interesting people, sooner or later they'll quit selling tickets because your shows are the shits. And if you have all great matches with people that the fans don't give a fuck about, then you're going to quit selling tickets even quicker, because then it's like with AEW, you're just seeing, even if they're great matches, you're seeing a steady barrage of the same shit with a bunch of people you don't know or care about. It all has to work together. And not every match on the card. That's what Eddie Graham used to do. He would give them good wrestling underneath and a lot of clean wrestling underneath, so that the main events, when they got wild or they got bloody or they had the personalities or they had the angles, it would not only stand out even more, but it would make an impact that you remembered going home. So you can't just have great matches. You can't just have rotten matches with stars in them. You have to have a mixture of everything up and down the card. And you can't go too far. Again, let's talk about the next match because, again, what you just mentioned, Jamie Hayter is probably going to turn on Britt Baker and become a big babyface because people like her. Well, imagine if when she did that, people hadn't already seen 5 turns in the last month. It might register a little more. That's what I'm talking about, is this steady onslaught of what they call great matches. And even Uncle Dave Meltzer, after he's lost his mind, he's rating all this shit. The girls get 5 stars, better than Flair and Steamboat, because it's a new era. They call them great matches over and over. What you're doing is you're just doing every goddamn thing that can be done over and over to numb and immune the people to any reaction of it. So there has to be context and some element of restraint sometimes, and you have to be more focused on the personalities of the individual wrestlers than just what moves they're going to do, and then you get more mileage out of all of this.
And it's more than the moves. It's even just how people carry themselves in the ring, how they move around the ring. Like
Yeah.
That was one of the little things that I loved about the Hayter and Storm match. And it's one of those, like I said before, where it stands out from everything else you're seeing. Is I'm sitting there going, and especially, nothing against Toni Storm, but especially with Jamie Hayter, and I'm going, she is moving around the ring like a wrestler. Somebody taught her how to really, I don't know, well, I can't articulate it as well as I'd like to, but just how to have the presence of a wrestler in a ring. And it's as simple as that. That can go a long way to getting the fans invested in a match.